Hi guys, Zach here from BIMteriors, and today's topic will go over wall moldings, how to create these profiles, and what kind of templates to use and start from. There's so many times I've seen YouTube tutorials, workflows, information online that kind of go over how to create these. But the issue is if you're interior designers or any other consultants where the prime consultant you're using, say for us, it's the architect, you're using their model, it's linked into yours, and you're using that for the background. And when you go to create your family, going through those workflows that might be uploaded to YouTube or wherever, they're typically wall based. And when you go into a linked element, it doesn't allow you to do that workflow. It doesn't understand. So we're going to go through what kind of families do work for when using linked models. And then in additional to that is how can we add parameters to these wall moldings so that this way here, once they're loaded into your project, you can actually then move them, manipulate them, and have full control while they're in your project rather than having to go back and forth to your family editor. So let's jump right into this. Okay, this is where we are going to have fun. We're going to create a custom family and making sure that we're starting off on the right foot, making sure that we're starting off with the right Revit template for specifically wall molding families, how to create these custom profiles. We won't go over because we went over in our previous episode. So if you do need a refresher, please go to the previous episode. If not, we will load that custom profile into our newly created wall molding family. And then how do we then use that profile to create an extrusion and sweep it around potentially the design layout that we want? And lastly, what we're going to do is create parameters. We're going to get outside, we're going to step outside of our comfort zone and start adding parameters so that when we do load it into our project, that it's so easy for us to actually navigate and utilize rather than having to go back and forth between your family and project. So at the top of your ribbon, if you go to the File tab and go to New, you're going to want to open up a new Revit family. So what's going to happen is Revit's going to ask you to select from a template as a starting point. And for this specific tutorial, I'm going to recommend the metric generic model. Now, in other YouTube videos or any of the online research that you've been doing, a lot of them will actually say start with the wall base. And this isn't bad. This is actually a great tool. However, if you're using, in this case here, as interior designers, and we're linking in other consultants' models, and in this case, specifically the architects, that have the walls and all the doors. And when we go to spend the time to create this family and add all the parameters and create our custom profiles, we go to load it into our project, it doesn't work. And you might have experienced this. And all that time that you spent creating that is now useless because it's not allowing you to even bring that into it's allowing you to bring it into your project, but it's not actually allowing you to put it on the walls you want because you might not have a wall there and the architect's wall there, but it doesn't recognize. Now, why Revit doesn't, that workflow doesn't work for Revit, I don't know. And hopefully it does get resolved soon. But in the meantime, and while that doesn't work, what you can do is go to metric generic model and select open. At this point, before we start doing anything, go to that custom profile that you have created and load it in. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to find that custom profile that I just created that's specifically to the molding that we selected. Now, again, this one here I did quickly, not the prettiest one, but it will do the job for this exercise. So I'm going to go and load this into our family and hit OK. So again, nothing has happened, but if you go to your project browser and you maximize your family, you'll start to see that, okay, that profile is loaded in and ready for us to use when we're ready for it. I'm going to go to an elevation view. So in this case here, the front side view, because I'm going to want to create what is going to be the path that I want this profile to sweep to. Now, before we start to get into forms and creating this extrusion, what I always tell my team members is go to the reference plane. So in your create tab, and reference plane, create these reference planes that we can start to use as guidelines as you're drawing these paths. And we'll get into why this is so important, specifically when we add parameters, when we get to that point. So potentially this is going to represent the offset from the finished floor of where I want this molding to start. I'll draw another one, and this might be the height of this molding and the extent of how far and how high I want it to go. And I'm going to draw lastly one over here, and this might be the length of how far I want this to run along that wall. So I've started to kind of create, as you can see here, the path that I'm going to want to create for my wall molding that I'm going to want to apply to our wall within our projects. So at this point, we've got this set up. What I would like to do is go to create at the top of your ribbon. And instead of going to extrusion blend, what I would recommend, which is going to be the most efficient way, is use sweep. So what this will allow us to do is that custom profile that we've already created, we can then create a path and say, use this profile to sweep this along that path, and it will instantly create a mask and profile to exactly what we want to do to represent that molding that we're specifying for our project. So using the wall sweep tool, it's first going to ask us to sketch a path. So in this case here, a little tip and trick, I'm just going to select a little rectangle or square within where I want it to go. And I'm going to align it to my reference planes. Now I'm going to stop right here and say the biggest hint I can give you is to lock these. And the main reason why we lock these to our reference planes is because we're going to add parameters, and this might not make sense to you now, but it will in a few minutes. As we add these dimensions and parameters, we assign them to the reference planes. Revit likes when parameters are attached to reference planes rather than the mask. Why? Again, above my knowledge of why that happens within the background data of Revit. However, this workflow seems to work really well when you attach it to reference planes rather than the mask itself. So once you've got your path aligned and locked to your reference planes, you can hit escape and you can finish the edit mode. So at this point, you're still within the creation because we've now created our path. So you can see now that's changed from purple to black. But now it's looking for us to pick a profile. So you can select the profile option and drop down to the profile that you just loaded in and hit on it. Now, I'd also recommend going to a 3D view at this point. So in this way here, you can start to see how that's going to sweep. So this profile is now loading in. So you can see that profile that we just created is here. And what this tool is going to do is it's going to sweep it along all four of these edges. And as it sweeps it, it's going to create a mask. So as I hit yes, please finish this, I'm happy with it. And I'm going to change this visual so that we can kind of see what's going on. You can see that this is getting a lot closer to what we visualize from what's kind of that design concept, what we've pitched to our client in our presentations. This is looking exactly like that. So this is great. We're one step closer to bringing this into our project and making our project that much more realistic to what's being designed and built. So at this point, we've created our profile, we've loaded our profile in, we've created a sweep, and we're so close, but we want to add that one little layer so that when we do bring it into our project, we have these grips and controls of where exactly this goes, and that's where the parameters come into play. So I'm going to go back to my front elevation, and this is where we're going to step outside of our comfort zone, and we're going to create parameters. So how to create parameters, what are parameters? The first step is to create a dimension. So if you go to the top of your ribbon, go to the Annotate tab, and you start to create some dimensions. So at this point, that might be the offset from the finished floor to the bottom of our molding. And then I'm going to create another one that will go from the bottom of our molding to the top. So this might represent the height of how high I want this extents to go. And lastly, I'm going to create one from here to here that might represent the length of how long I want that specifically on our wall. So again, I've done nothing other than create dimensions. These aren't parameters yet. Now to create a parameter, select on that dimension. And now under the modify and dimension, there are now some additional options available to us. And under the label dimensions, if you hover over this, this is a create parameter tool, an icon. And when you select this, it now opens up a parameter properties box. This is where it's going to ask you to create a name. And in this case here, I'm going to just quickly say floor offset. And then it's going to ask you for a type or an instance parameters. And the easiest way I can make this sound is that a type parameter is if I had this family 50 times in the project. If I change this offset from 243 to 400, every single 50 instances in the project will change. Now this might not be exactly what you want, and you might want to have control that this might change from room to room. Even in the same room it might change, and you want the flexibility to have control of that. And that's where the instance parameter comes into play, where if you change one, it only changes that instance rather than the entire type of that family. So this still might not make sense to you, but once we load it into the project, we'll go through that exercise just to show you what that does mean. And hit OK. And I'm going to use this same workflow. I'm just going to change the scale so that we doesn't get too chaotic in our elevation. I'm going to do that same workflow and give this potentially a height parameter. And I want to make this an instance as well because I'm going to want control of this. And I'm going to make this a length parameter. And also lastly, again, an instance parameter rather than a type. So at this case here, I always like to test these out before I load them in. So maybe my floor offset, I'm just going to make it to 305. You can see here, as I shifted that, everything moved. It means that worked. That's great. So maybe if I change the height as well, so maybe my height changes to 1600, you can see it didn't go into my floor offset, which is fantastic, and it only grew upwards. So that's exactly what we want to start to see. And last thing, I'm going to change my width to maybe this is 3 feet. And I can see it starting to move and flex the way we want it to, which is fantastic. And the cool thing about this is you've now just learned how to add parameters to your families. They're not scary. And we've done it for this wall molding, but you can take these same workflows and this same approach and apply it to any one of your families. And then you have that much more control when you bring them into your project. So at this point, I'm going to just file, save as a family, and I'm going to save this as the wall molding. I'm just going to overwrite it because I was just doing some tests earlier. And once I have that to the specific name, I'm going to load this into my project. So this way here, I know exactly what it is when I'm trying to look for it. So if we're, in this case here, I'm on the second story of my entry hallway and I want to add paneling to this wall, I can now come in here and place that. And I'm going to go to, and again, I'm going to just go to my elevation view. You can see I started to place these. This is great. I can actually now see like that profile that we specified, that we had in our inspiration, is now being able to be illustrated in our drawing packages. And it wasn't super complex to create. And the other cool thing is that now when I have this selected in my properties, now these parameters that we just created are not options for us. So if I came here to my floor offset and I said, actually, I'm going to make this, you can see that new parameter and that new number that we just put in instantly did that. So if I change that back to 100, you can see here it's now moving this for us. Or better yet, it also now has grips. So you can actually grip this and change this manually while you're in this elevation, and that will also change too. What I would like to kind of show as well is that difference between the type and instance parameter. So if I had this copied over here, you can see that now I've got the ability to change one, and it doesn't affect everywhere else that this might be applied in your projects. And so that's the difference between a type and a instance parameter. If this was a type and I tried to change that, it would change everywhere where this family was in our model, where now this allows me to create as custom as a design as I want. And I've got full control to align it, to shift it to the project design. So again, we can just kind of have a lot of fun with this and really make it as unique as possible. And by adding these parameters, you now have full control to be able to modify it and change it while you're in your views, making it that much more easy for you. That's a wrap with wall moldings. Hopefully, you learned something new today. That you're first of all starting with on the right foot, making sure that you're picking the right Revit template for your project, your workflows, and making sure that you're spending that time that it actually does work. Secondly, we're getting more and more comfortable with creating custom profiles, creating families. And lastly, now kind of stepping outside of our comfort zone and creating parameters. So when we do bring this into our project, we have full control to make it work the way we want it to work, and just becoming that much more efficient rather than having to go back and forth and back and forth. If you're hearing this message, it means that you've listened to the new video all the way to the end. And for that, I thank you. Please like and subscribe now to gain access to new Revit content weekly.